Hi, boys and girls, and welcome to Reading Workshop. This week we are changing from nonfiction biographies to fiction books and fairy tales. So, what we're going to be doing this week is comparing and contrasting two stories or two main characters, okay? And if you only have one book, you can pick two characters from the same book, okay? But ideally, you want to find two different stories. So you can compare and contrast the main character in both stories. So now, boys and girls, I'm going to read to you Cinderella. Okay, this is Cinderella. And then I'm going to read Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and this is Goldilocks. So keep in mind that we are going to be comparing and contrasting Goldilocks to Cinderella. What that means is we're going to find out how they are the same and how they are different. Okay, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the stories I'm about to read to you. Okay, Cinderella. There once lived a man who was kind and who had a kind and pretty wife and a beautiful daughter. Sadly, the man's wife died soon after their daughter was born. A few years later, he married again. His second wife was not kind or pretty, and she already had two daughters who were so selfish, proud, and greedy that they were known as the Ugly Sisters. From the first day they moved in, the Ugly Sisters were cruel and unkind to their stepsister. They made Cinderella clean the house from top to bottom, do all the cooking, and clear out the cinders from the fireplace. She spent so much time doing this that her stepsisters called her Cinderella. One day, the king and queen decided to hold a grand ball. The two ugly sisters couldn't believe their luck when, the very next day, an invitation arrived. On the night of the ball, the ugly sisters paraded their new clothes in front of poor Cinderella and asked her to tell them what suited them best. After they left, Cinderella sat on a little stool near the fire. "Why are my sisters so mean to me?" she thought. "I do everything they tell me to do around the house and more. They never give me a kind word or even a smile at me." She felt so unhappy and began to cry. Suddenly, a beautiful woman carrying a silver wand appeared right in front of her. She seemed to have come from nowhere. "Who are you?" asked Cinderella, a little frightened. "Don't be scared. I'm your fairy godmother," said the beautiful woman. "What's the matter, child? Why are you crying?" "I would have loved to gone to that ball too," wept Cinderella, "but my stepsisters don't want me to go." "Don't worry," said the fairy godmother kindly. "You shall go to that ball. But first, I'd like you to bring me some things. I need a pumpkin, 2 mice, and the biggest rat you can find." With one wave of her silver wand, the fairy godmother changed the pumpkin into a golden coach, the mice into 2 magnificent white horses, and the rat into a coachman. With another wave of her wand, the fairy godmother changed Cinderella's raggedy dress into a ball gown made of the finest satin and silver thread. On her feet were a pair of beautiful glass slippers. "Now go and enjoy yourself," said the fairy godmother, "but be sure to be back before midnight, for when the clock strikes 12, everything will return to what it was before." Cinderella stepped into the glistening carriage and was whisked through the dark streets until she reached the place. Okay, when she entered the ballroom, everyone stared. They had never seen such a beautiful girl before. The prince fell in love with her as soon as he saw her and danced with her all evening. She was having such a wonderful time, she forgot all about Fairy Godmother's warning. All of a sudden, she heard the clock strike 12. "Oh no," she thought, "I must leave." She tore herself from the prince's arm and rushed out of the ballroom. The prince couldn't understand why this lovely girl would suddenly run away. He searched the palace for her, but he couldn't find her anywhere. But in her rush to leave, Cinderella had left behind one of her glass slippers. When the prince found it at the palace steps, he immediately said that he intended to find and marry the girl whose foot fitted into the glass slipper. He would visit every house in the land until he had found her. The ugly sisters were very excited. On the day that the prince was going to visit their house, they made sure they wore their best dresses. When the prince arrived, he held out a glass slipper and asked which one of the sisters would like to try it on first. "I will," cried one of them. But as much as she tried to push and squeeze her foot into that slipper, it just wouldn't fit. Her foot was way too big. "Give it to me," said the other sister, grabbing the slipper, tried to put it on. But her foot was far too big too. However much she pushed and tugged, she still couldn't get her foot to fit into it. Just then Cinderella stepped forward. She had been standing quietly in the shadows and no one had noticed her. "May I try?" she asked shyly. "You?" cried the ugly sisters. "Of course you can't. Now get back in that kitchen where you belong." "Be quiet," ordered the prince. "Of course you may," he said, turning to Cinderella, not recognizing her. Cinderella sat down and put the slipper on her foot. It glided on perfectly. The ugly sisters gasped in amazement. "I recognize you now," said the prince, smiling. "You are the girl I fell in love with at the ball, and you are the girl I am going to marry." Cinderella replied, "I loved you the moment I met you." Cinderella and the prince had a glorious wedding. She forgave her sisters and never had to wash a dirty dish again. Okay, so boys and girls, that was Cinderella. Now we're going to move on to Goldilocks, okay? So you're still sitting, relaxing, listening to the story, okay? And then the work will come after this story. Okay, so this was Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Not long after they had gone, a little girl called Goldilocks, who was out walking in the woods, stumbled across a little cottage where the three bears lived. She thought it was so lovely and she wanted to look inside. She carefully opened the door and shut it quietly behind her. The first thing she noticed was that the 3 bowls of porridge on the kitchen table. They looked really yummy, she thought. "I'm so hungry. I'm sure no one will mind if I ate just a little." First, she tried a spoonful of porridge from the big bowl, but that was too salty. Next, she tried a spoonful of porridge from the medium-sized bowl, but that was too sweet. Finally, she tried a spoonful of porridge from the teeny-weeny bowl. That was just right. Goldilocks was so hungry she ate every last bite. She felt tired after eating so much and decided to sit down for a while. First, she tried to sit in a big chair, but it was too big. Her feet didn't even touch the ground. Next, she tried the medium-sized chair. It was a little bit better, but she could only reach the ground with her toes. Finally, she sat in a teeny-weeny chair that was just right. But she was far too big for the teeny-weeny chair. When she sat down, she broke it. "I wonder if there are any beds upstairs," she thought. "I'm sure no one would mind if I took a little nap." She went upstairs and saw 3 beds. The first bed she tried was a big floppy bed. "This bed is far too soft," she thought. The next bed was a very neat medium-sized bed. "This bed is far too hard," she thought. Finally, she laid on the teeny-weeny bed. "This bed is just right," she thought Goldilocks, and was soon fast asleep. When the 3 little bears returned from their walk, they were very hungry and looking forward to eating their porridge. The first thing they saw were spoons lying in their porridge bowls. "Who's been eating my porridge?" cried Papa Bear in a big grumpy voice. "Who's been eating my porridge?" said Mama Bear in a medium-sized voice. "Who's been eating my porridge and eating it all up?" cried teeny-weeny baby bear in a teeny weeny voice. Papa Bear was so grumpy he decided to sit down, but he noticed the cushion of his chair was messed up. "Who's been sitting in my chair?" he cried in a big grumpy voice. "Who's been sitting in my chair?" cried Mama Bear in a medium-sized voice, noticing that her cushion was messy too. "Who has been sitting in my chair and broken it?" yelled Teeny Weeny Baby Bear. "This is making me really grumpy," said Papa Bear in a big grumpy voice. "I'm going to bed." The other bears agreed and followed him up the stairs. When they got there, they saw that their beds were messed up too. "Who's been sleeping in my bed?" cried Papa Bear in a big grumpy voice. "Who's been sleeping in my bed?" cried Mama Bear in a medium-sized voice. "And who's been sleeping in my bed and still sleeping in my bed?" cried Teeny Weeny Baby Bear in a teeny weeny voice. All this shouting woke Goldilocks. When she saw the three bears looking over angrily at her, she leaped out of the bed, ran down the stairs and out the door, and into the woods as fast as she could. And the three bears were very pleased that they never saw her ever again. The end. Okay, so now, boys and girls, we are going to compare and contrast Cinderella to Goldilocks. So I need you to watch video 2 for the comparing and contrasting part of this assignment. Okay, see you soon.